Brian Smith here, and welcome to the DreamPath podcast, where I try to get inside the heads of talented creatives from all over the world. My goal is to demystify and humanize the creative process and make it accessible to everyone. Now let's jump in. Folks, this is a really special interview for me. Back in the 1970s, when the band Heart started recording their first few albums, becoming one of the most iconic bands of the era, and fortifying their place in rock history with songs like Magic Man, Barracuda, Dog and Butterfly, Mistral Wind, and Crazy on You. I was just a kid, not even in kindergarten yet, but Heart's songs were already in my musical consciousness. I was listening to Heart not only because their music was all over the radio, but also because I had a connection to them that none of my friends or classmates had. My dad, Greg Smith, was the private pilot for Heart and flew them all over the world on tour throughout the 70s and 80s. At one point, about half of my childhood wardrobe consisted of Heart concert t-shirts. I even got to meet Heart several times over the years, usually backstage at a concert. Because of that connection, and because of my deep respect for the musicianship and songwriting in that band, I will always think of Heart as one of the most formative bands for me growing up. That is why I'm so excited to be sitting down with Roger and Michael Fisher. Born in Seattle, Washington, on February 14th, 1950, Roger Fisher was a founding guitarist of Heart, a band that is globally known through the sales of more than 40 million albums. Roger has played in every major city in North America many times. He has also toured Europe, Japan, Australia, Uzbekistan, and Russia, and performed at massive events in Czech Republic, Japan, Canada, the United States for more than 300,000 people at a single rock show. He has appeared in a multitude of television shows, including Johnny Carson and Jay Leno, and television broadcasts for more than 60 million people in Europe. Songs featuring Roger's songwriting and iconic guitar riffs have been used in numerous TV commercials, TV shows, Guitar Hero, the video game, and in several movies, including Charlie's Angels and Shrek 3. Other artists have covered his material, including Eminem. His timeless anthem guitar intro to Barracuda is frequently used as the lead-in for nationally broadcasted radio talk shows. And Tony Robbins refers to it as part of the turning point in his life. As the original guitarist for Heart, Roger was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the band in 2013. Roger's new albums, All Told and Heart of the Blues, are the first of many new releases with brother Mike, aka Magic Man. Together, the brothers are creating a massive multimedia endeavor called the One Vision Project. Although Michael didn't play an instrument in Heart, he was behind the scenes when the band was formed, serving not only as the band's first manager, but also as a visionary figure for the band, helping them navigate the treacherous and unpredictable waters of the music industry and touring scene, as well as influencing the direction of their music. Michael was so revered and respected by the band. He was the inspiration behind the song Magic Man, a nickname for Michael that has stuck for more than 40 years after the song was written. So with Michael at the helm of the band and Roger on guitar, along with bandmates Steve Fossen, Mike DeRozier, Howard Leese, and Annie Nancy Wilson, Heart recorded their first 4 hit records, Dreamboat Annie, Little Queen, Magazine, and Dog and Butterfly. Roger Fisher and Michael Fisher, welcome to the DreamPath podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here.
The way it happened was there was a version of Heart that broke up, disbanded, and then there was this other band called Hocus Pocus. And then she left that band and joined me up in Canada. And then we created Heart together, Roger, Ann, and Steve and I.
Okay. So, Michael, what was your role in the band Army back in '63?
I was the guy with the money and a job, which gave me a certain amount of authority to put in my 2 cents or my $25 worth, whatever it was, and have an opinion that would make a difference on whether or not we got a gig or bought some equipment or what song we might play or how we might look on stage or, all of those kinds of management kind of things.
So how many years older are you than
2?
2 years older. So Roger was 13 and you were 15?
Well, we didn't start the band when he was 13, did we?
I'm working
No,
off of
I
Wikipedia
didn't-
on some of this. So
Yeah, I didn't start playing until I was 15, 1965.
Oh, okay.
And so we would have started the Army probably in 1966.
Yeah.
Seems like so long ago.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Because let's see, we played my high school auditorium the year after I graduated, and that was really fun to go back and have our band, which was really good. That band, Army, was great.
And you played in high school auditoriums and that type of thing?
Yeah,
as
it was
Army?
actually the theater. It was a really nice theater.
And what high school was that?
That was Inglemoor High School.
Okay. And where's that?
It's in the Kenmore area.
Oh, okay.
of North Seattle suburb, kind of.
Yeah. And so you had a job, you were older than Roger, and you were kind of guiding the band. And were you also playing in the band?
No, I didn't play in the band. I swore off playing. It's a long story. We don't need to get into it, but I swore off playing when I was about 11 or 10 years old, and really became interested in visual arts. And so I was interested in painting and drawing and really serious about it, really studied art history, and realized that this music thing is art too. It's these musicians are like a palette of paints, and you can work with them and create this living piece of art by working with people like that. And
you found yourself working with musicians in a different way.
yeah, that correction is really key, because the thing that happened when that band broke up is like such a key point in the way that Heart came together, because it was a love affair between Ann and I, and it was incredibly intense, and I just loved her singing and her musical side. And so what I thought would be really incredible was to take that sensibility that she had and combine it with this rock energy that Raj had. And I couldn't think of any other band that existed that had those elements so powerfully put together.
Yeah.
So I was fired up about this vision I had for what that band could become.
So just so I'm clear on the history and sort of the evolution of the names of the band, Army was the band before Ann got into the picture, right? And then when you met Ann and had a romance with her and fell in love with her, that Army broke up, and then a new band was formed called Hocus Pocus. Is that correct?
No, Army broke up. Army kind of transformed into this band called Whiteheart.
Oh, okay.
And then that shortened to just Heart. And then that band broke up. And then they created Hocus Pocus. Roger, Steve, and Ann created that band. And it was totally different than what Heart was to be in the future. It was a whole different kind of musical approach.
So Hocus Pocus was after the old version of Heart, but before the version of Heart that made the 4 albums that we just heard about. Okay. All right. That makes sense.
Yeah, we didn't know what we were going to call it. That was a spirited discussion, because Ann wanted to call it something different. And I really had this idea for a cool promotional photo that used a piece of equipment that had Heart stenciled on it. I thought it would be really cool. And Raj was real set on having it called Heart too. So that's what we did.
So what year did you meet Ann?
I think it was 71.
And how did you meet her?
Well, all of this was taking place against the backdrop of the Vietnam War. And another long story that I can't go into in the kind of detail it deserves, but I ended up living in Canada, and I was going to college up there. And I really missed my brother, so I would make these trips down to visit him. And it turned out that he was playing in Bellingham, which is just across the border from Vancouver, where I lived. And he had this new band he was all excited about. And he was excited about how good the singer was. And so I wanted to go see my bro. And we walked into this club, and Ann was sitting on the floor with a glass of wine in one hand, a cigarette in the other hand, and some written lyrics between her cross-legged legs. And she looked up at me, and I looked at her, and it was just like that, just love at first sight. It was really something.
So that was 1971.
Roughly, wasn't it, do you think?
Yeah, that would have been about right. Because didn't she move up in 72?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
That was probably the fall of 71.
And when you say moved up, you mean she moved it to Canada with you?
Yeah, we were kind of carrying on a written back and forth, long before the internet. And one day she appeared at my door. Total surprise to me. There she was.
In Canada.
Yeah.
And I read, and I'm sorry to refer to Wikipedia so often, but that's like one of my main sources of information on these interviews sometimes before I go into them. But I read that you both lived at the same house in Canada or in a U.S. territory in Canada or something like that.
Such an amazing story. You really need hours and hours to do this properly.
Right.
But
we have as much time as the memory card will hold. So.
Yeah. So I had gone through a series of kind of communal homes that I created. And this last one where Ann joined me was this incredible estate on a couple acres in West Vancouver in a super nice neighborhood with a mountain stream flowing through it, garden park-like grounds. And this kind of little mini mansion there where the people had built a playroom for their kids with a kitchen and bathroom and everything in it next to their house, kind of hanging over the mountain stream. And
it was a round.
Yeah, round with floor-to-ceiling windows 3/4 of the way around it. It was a spectacular place to live. I lived there by myself because I had rented this whole place and rented it out to my friends and some strangers. And it turned out that it wasn't a compatible living situation because I was responsible to the landlord, and I just couldn't conscionably continue with the way it was being treated. So I had to evict everybody. There I was with a great big empty house, and I lived in the little roundhouse. And so Roger and Steve and they moved up with Ann and I, and then we all lived in that one room with all our equipment.
Yeah. Wow. And
for a while.
And Ann and Steve and I became landed immigrants so we could work up there. And
what kind of work were you doing up there? Just like music, or were you doing
just music?
Just music. And
we were so poor. All we had was a 50-pound bag of short grain brown rice to live off. And so Ann would make a different kind of brown rice every night for dinner. We had a little bit of money that we got from Mike, I guess, and we would buy some vegetables and
my student loan.
Yeah, his student loan. Yeah.
And so it almost sounds like a communal living situation where you're all kind of helping each other, and you don't have a lot of money, but you're just making things work however you can manage them. We
had so little money that we didn't have enough to pay for heat. We didn't have a phone. We were so short on food that we would scavenge food from the neighbors' gardens sometimes.
We would go to a gas station and steal toilet paper.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was really on the edge. In fact, the way we got our first job was we actually completely ran out of money. I had one dime left, and that in those days you had to use a dime to use the phone if you didn't have one at home. Yeah. I went down to the drugstore with my dime to call a booking agent to see if we could get a gig. I used the the pharmacy down the hill, and I put my dime in and called the major agent in Vancouver, who has become really famous over the years, and it's part of the bigger story, that guy. But he took my call, and he told me that he would come and see us and wanted to know where we were playing. And I said, I gave him the address. He said, well, that sounds like it's a house. And I said, yeah, we're rehearsing in our basement. And so he said, well, call me back when you have a gig, and hung up on me. So
the pharmacist heard what was going on.
Yeah, he was my friend because I used the phone all the time, so we were friendly.
And so what'd you do next?
He looked at me and said, geez, Mike, looks like you just lost your best friend. What happened? And I told him, and he said, oh, here, gave me another dime, said, call the next guy. So I went through the yellow pages, and I saw this other booking agency, and it was in our neighborhood. It was like blocks away. So I called the guy, and this delightful English accent answered the phone. And it was this really cool guy. He said, I'll be right over. So in a few minutes, this little English guy that looked like Dudley Moore pulls up in a canary yellow Jaguar XKE convertible. It's just like right out of the movies. And came down and listened to us play. I think it was our Led Zeppelin medley we had, and he was absolutely blown away. And it's such a good memory to have. So it just turned out to be our luck that the biggest nightclub in Vancouver, which was called The Cave, it was really this cool place. It was all designed like a cave inside. The band that was supposed to play there that weekend had canceled, and they brought in national acts from, wherever. And so they desperately needed somebody. So he arranged for an audition for us. So we went down there, this great big, huge club. And the band was really nervous because we hadn't played for anybody yet. And we set up.
It was Steve, Roger, and Ann.
Yeah. And a couple other musicians from Canada that we had hired. And so we're getting ready to do the audition, and Anne is so nervous that she goes and throws up in the bathroom right before she goes to play. And the club owner comes and sits right in the middle of the dance floor, one chair, one guy, and we're playing for him. It's really a lot of pressure. And I don't know if he liked us that much, but he was pretty stuck. So he had us be the headliner, and he called us Heart from San Francisco. And the band that was the opening act was this really big Canadian Vancouver local band that had a new album out on the radio. And they had to open for these nobodies from West Vancouver. And they really didn't like it that they had to do that. But
so it went pretty well?
Yeah.
What was that? Who was that band?
I think it was High Flying Bird.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So after that, was that a turning point for that version of the band Heart at that point?
Yeah, that was the launch.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we played probably every weekend. Maybe we missed one or two somewhere, but I think we played continuously after that. Sometimes 14 days in a row or more, 5 sets a night. That's how you get really good.
So you're able to buy more than rice at that point?
Well, not much, because we played cheap because we had to work. We had no choice. So yeah, we pooled our money, and we made it work.
So when did you make your way back down to the States?
Well, let's see. 74, I think. Yeah.
And is that about the time that Nancy joined the band?
No, Nancy came up to visit her sister, and right away we knew that we had to get Nancy in the band, but she was going to the university, and her parents had other plans for her. They didn't want her to end up being a musician, God forbid.
No parent does.
Yeah. She was getting like straight A's in college, and they really had high hopes for her, and but she couldn't resist the musical life, and lucky for her, she she decided to join us.
And then I think I read that she actually moved in with you guys up there before you all came back to the United States. Mm-hmm. Okay. And is that when, and I don't want to get too gossipy with the interview, but is that when the romance started, Roger, with you and Nancy?
Roughly, yeah. So she moved up, and I guess it was shortly after she moved up, she started to come and see what I was doing. I was living with a luthier, and it was fascinating because this guy was a real guitar maker, and I was trying to learn the craft. And so I was, doing some woodworking, and she and I just started hanging out together, and my God, it was amazing. Yeah, because I had my eyes on her for a long time, and she wasn't real thrilled about getting together with me because she saw that I was with, many different other girls. And
she thought you might be a player?
Yeah. But, we seemed pretty attracted to each other, and so we got together. Yeah.
And that was about 74 then? Or a little later than that?
No, that would be earlier than that.
Oh, earlier than 74? Okay.
So we played in Canada for 2 or 3 years before we ended up going back down. Yeah, we kind of became a big fish in a small pond, kind of in a way, in our stratus of
in Vancouver.
Yeah, Western Canada.
Yeah. And so when you made your way back down to the United States, was that before the first studio album?
Yeah.
Okay. And then tell us how the first studio album came together and what that process looked like.
We were making the first studio album before we went down, weren't we?
No.
Because I was living with Flicker. Me and Nance were living with Flicker while we were recording the album.
Yeah. But we had been down to the States before that.
Mm.
No, the way it came about was that before I went to Canada, we were recording, I guess our band was called Whiteheart then. We were recording here in the Seattle area with Buck Ormsby and Neil Rush. Buck Ormsby was with the Wailers, and Neil Rush with Merrily Rush and the Turnabouts. And we did a couple songs with them, and God, we were just so thrilled by that. And then I had to leave abruptly and kind of went my own way. And when we got all fired up about creating Heart, of course we wanted to record. And in the meantime, Raj and I had been talking about creating a new band. And as soon as I got up to Canada, I started looking around at the recording scene, and it was really cool up here. I mean, up in Vancouver. It was a more robust recording scene than in Seattle. And there was an article in the paper about this hot new producer that had moved up from LA to work at the studio in Canada. And I just thought, wow, that's cool. I got to go check that guy out. Maybe he could work with us. And so I went and met this guy, and it was Mike Flicker. And he was just new then in Vancouver. And he was really nice, and he was encouraging, told me to come back when we had our band together, which we didn't even have a band at the time. And so we went about creating the band, and in the process we met this engineer who worked at that studio, this guy who was an aspiring recording engineer. He's kind of working his way up the ladder, and he liked our band. He would come and see us all the time, and we said, well, what's Flicker doing, and he would kind of keep us posted on that. And then we decided to make a demo so we could shop our band to music labels.
And at this point, Nancy and Ann are in, and it's the second version of Heart, or the
real version.
The real
of Heart.
version of Heart. Okay.
The one that became successful and everybody knows and loves.
Right.
Yeah. So we went and made this demo with our own money and met Howard Leese, who was kind of a studio musician there.
And best friends of Mike Flicker. They had moved up together.
Yeah. And he was just a really great guitar player and kind of a real good student of music. And he helped us with the production. And in the meantime, we're talking to Flicker about it, and he's not very encouraging. And I asked him to produce us, and he said, well, the only one I would be interested in would be Ann. And I said, well, we're a band, so that won't work. And so we went about and we shopped our tape and got zero interest in it. And meanwhile, the band is becoming more and more popular on the local level. And then we started playing down in the Seattle area and around the Northwest, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and really drawing big crowds as a band playing covers, a lot of Led Zeppelin songs and Yes, and a lot of stuff that other bands weren't playing. And we were actually out drawing national acts, some of the places we would play in Vancouver and Calgary and Great Falls and Seattle and Spokane and Portland. Yeah, it was amazing. And then we were starting to make some money too. And our local draw in Vancouver became so obvious that you almost couldn't go wrong by making a record with us. And I went back to Flicker and I said, gee, this is like a slam dunk, don't you think? And he said, well, I like Roger and Nancy and Ann, but that's all I want to do business with. The rest of the guys is, we could use studio musicians, So I said, okay, well, we got to have the bass player. Yeah. And so he said, okay, we'll give it a try. So we'll do one song. And the beauty of the Canadian scene was that in Canada, they have this thing called Canadian content, where they have to have like a third of the music be created by Canadians on the radio. So, Canada has a population of less than California to draw from for the 30% of the content.
Right.
And then, there's a lot of music coming from England too, that's competing for space on the radio. So they have to come up with some decent stuff, and that gives record companies and people who want to invest in that a lot of freedom to feel like they might have success. So we recorded this song called How Deep It Goes, and I put it out, and it got some success in some cities, but it wasn't like huge. It was number one in Victoria. And in a few other cities, but mostly it was just kind of there, but it was enough that the label which we were on, which was from that studio called Mushroom Records, decided to do a whole album. And that's kind of how it got started.
And is that what you would refer to as being signed to a label? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they say, all right, let's do a full studio album. And what's the process look like of creating Dreamboat Annie? And I assume that was the first album, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what does that look like, and what is your role at that point in terms of sound and vision and how you were influencing the process, Mike?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Well, this was like really a big deal for us, and we had thought about it for years, and we were in the milieu of performing in clubs in front of audiences all the time and trying to know what they were going to like, picking the new songs we were going to play for them. So we were really attuned to what people liked and wanted and what would work. And so in the songwriting, we knew that we would need this kind of song to get this reaction, or that kind of song to do that. That really influenced the way the songs were written and kind of came, because they were needed, in addition to, some of the things that were just sort of loved, things about music that were just loved. The album kind of grew organically out of that potpourri of needs and desires and things that people liked about music.
Well, Roger, it sounds like what I'm hearing from Mike is that you guys have this crew of people and their friends and their lovers, and you're together in this band, but you have outside influences saying, no, we want that person or this group of people, but you guys are resisting that, and you are insisting on staying together. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of a theme that when you look back on the history of the band, that there were these influences from the outside trying to pull you apart, but you had to hold it together through loyalty and friendship?
Well, yeah, that was just one little instance of a choice that we had to make, and we chose to be a band rather than, jump on the first opportunity that comes along. Oh, another correction is, so I didn't start Alias.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was a really, really, really unpleasant experience. It was a situation where the record company had this idea that if they got the former Heart guys and the former Sheriff guys and put them together, that would be something they could make money off. So the Sheriff guys made an album, and then the record company, along with the Sheriff guys, made it appear that this was a band that had made this album, these former Heart guys and the former Sheriff guys. So it was this big scam of untruth. And it just really disgusted me, and I let everybody know that I didn't want to be a part of that, and I quit the group. And then their manager called me one day and worked me and finally convinced me to go ahead and stay in the band. So I did, and we went to New York City, and we were doing an all-day promo push where we were calling radio stations all over the country. We spent all day, and each of us had different stations, different cities allocated to us. And so when I heard what our tack was, what our spin was on our story, I said, I'm not saying that bullshit. I'm not going to lie like that. And when the record company guys heard that, it was like this, we got a real problem here. So they had us come to this conference room, and they sat us down and said, Roger, just sidestep it. Just work around it, and so I agreed to go ahead and do the dance, and it was just so against my principles. And then when we went out and did our thing, it was just so miserable, because it was just, we were just constantly being taken advantage of by the record company and by our management, and it was just a disgusting experience. It was a real good learning experience for me, but at least I had the balls to stand up for truth, and so that was good, and it set the characters. It made it obvious to everybody involved which characters stood for what. Yeah, and so I was alone.
It revealed integrity or lack of integrity.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting what you find on the internet as truth, with this Wikipedia thing, and anybody can edit
There's
it.
There's a lot of stuff on there that's not real.
Yeah.
About us. I mean.
So Mike, I want to know more about your role in the band, because I when I was at the concert last night in Edmonds, I heard Roger talk about you as the Magic Man, and that you were the inspiration for that song or something like that. And what in your mind was your role in the band in that era that would lead your brother Roger to say that you were the Magic Man? What was going on?
I'd be real interested to know what's in his mind.
Right. Well, maybe you could tell us, Roger.
Well, that was a moniker given by Anne.
Well, before that,
well, yeah, it was just the time that Steve and I and Anne moved up to Canada, became landed, and worked on our music project together, was a really magical time. It was so strange, the things that went on sometimes. Mike was always really adept at being tenacious enough to land us a good house to rent. And that was true even before we moved up, when he was just living with all his buddies up there. He would find these great deals on houses, and I think that's where he first got the moniker Magic Man.
Magic Mikey is what they called me.
Because he would land on these great deals and great places and wonderful opportunities of places to live. And that continued on as we moved around a bit when we lived up there. And but in addition to that, I remember times like playing Frisbee out on a field where I don't know if we had smoked some pot or what, but just unexplainable things would happen from time to time, where it was like we entered a different dimension or something. It's difficult to talk about because it was so otherworldly, so unreal, so magical. And so that was kind of centered around Mike for me. I would just come off as a kook if I tried to explain or describe what happened. So all I can say is that there were really, really amazing magical occurrences that happened from time to time that I have no explanation for.
Other than that Mike was there at the time. And you're associating these things with Mike being there during important pivotal moments in your career, in your life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And was that always the case when you were growing up? He's 2 years older than you. He's your older brother. Was Mike always someone that you looked up to and kind of were influenced by and impressed by as a human being?
Hugely. Yeah. So much so that when I started playing guitar, I became somewhat of a recluse and would just play all the time. And I lost some social skills, and Mike would just always do the talking for me. And I became real dependent on that. And I had a real kind of inferiority complex because I wasn't the one who was in charge of my communication part of myself, and I preferred not to be. I'd rather just sit and play guitar. And so that was something that that was some real baggage that I had to confront. And that happened when we were in Heart and we were in New York City, and we were supposed to do a interview with Life magazine. Life magazine had been out of print for several years, and this was their debut new magazine coming out again, and Heart was featured in it. And we were supposed to go to this big deal interview. But that morning was the morning I decided, I'm going to become my own person now, and I'm going to make my own choices. And my first choice is I'm not going to that interview. I'm going to go walk around New York City and start to be a man who faces his own demons and fears and dragons. And one by one, I'm going to face every fear until I'm not fearful anymore. And so it was kind of a brave step. Wasn't very considerate of my bandmates or management or anything, but I didn't care. I was making this move. So that was a real turning point for me, and a real important dragon to face.
So I heard Mike earlier talk about him kind of walking away from musical instruments at the age of 11 and moving more toward visual arts and also, participating in the band in different ways other than by playing in the band, but influencing it in a different way. How did you develop as a musician and when did that start?
Well, I started playing guitar at 15. It's an interesting story about how that came about. I'd been hanging around with these creeps in high school who they're a typical night hanging out with them was going out and breaking into houses and getting a bunch of things that they could sell and make money from, as well as all the liquor in the house that we could find. And then we would go to the elementary school parking lot and divvy up the goods and get drunk. And I would get brought home really late at night and then have to go to school the next day. And this went on and on for a while until, of course, we got busted. And I remember being so ashamed and humiliated when standing in front of the judge with my mom. The judge said, "So what were some of the things that you took?" And I said, "Well, I didn't take things. The only thing I ever took from all those break-ins was the 8-ball off a pool table." And the judge says, "Well, I can see you're just hanging around with the wrong crowd. You're free to go." And so on the way home, Mom said, "Well, what can we do? What can you do with your time so that you're not doing this kind of stuff?" And I said, "Well, could you rent me a guitar?" And so I would practice 8 hours a day with practicing the wrong stuff. I was really intent on being a good guitar player. And after about a year of playing, I realized, God, that's really wrong what I was doing. I've got to totally relearn guitar playing now. But that was an important lesson too. And being a teacher now, it's good to be able to tell a young student, go this way, don't go that way. Yeah.
So were you taking lessons or are you pretty self-taught?
Just self-taught, which was the problem, which was why I spent a whole year going up a dead-end road that I shouldn't have gone up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the musicianship that I hear on those albums, those 4 studio albums, and also on your solo record, all told, and what I saw at Edmonds Performing Arts Center last night, you seem to have, well, first of all, you're amazing. I mean, just rock legend level amazing at the lead guitar. But I notice that you're playing with your fingers a lot, almost like you're playing classical guitar sometimes, but you're really fast at it. And it seems a bit unorthodox. And I play guitar. I'm not good at it, but I know enough about it to see like classic, by the book methods. And is that a product of your self-taught upbringing as a guitarist?
Yeah, that's a real interesting topic because the classic kind of traditional guitar playing that you hear so many guitarists touch on and use, and you could call them cliche licks. That's really not fair to call them cliche licks, but they are in a way that so many people use these commonalities. And I choose not to go there because I just really don't like following the crowd. And when I was learning how to play guitar, I noticed that there's so many of these British musicians who were deeply influenced by blues players, and they took old blues songs and redid them and created these amazing works. Led Zeppelin and so many of those bands.
Peter Green, with Mick,
and Cream, and they were just heavily influenced by the blues and really created modern, inventive, creative versions of these songs. And of course, they were hugely popular. But I didn't want to have that same direction. So I thought, well, rather than be influenced by those blues players, I would like to pretend that I was one of those guys that went through hellish circumstances in the Delta in slavery and had to rise above that pain and find my own voice. So I was one of the original blues players in my pretending mind, rather than being influenced by them. And because I chose that road, I couldn't copy these guys. I had to come up with things that I'd never heard before. So that was my road, and I stayed on that road until many years later, people say, when I hear your guitar playing, I know it's you immediately because you don't sound like anybody else. And that's my favorite compliment.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, because I was listening for blues licks and kind of the standard. I mean, as a musician, I gravitate toward blues licks too because they're fun. They're probably on the easier side of things to play. They're accessible. But I was listening for that on your album and at the concert, and I didn't hear that. I don't hear a lot of blues influence. And now that you mention it, I don't hear a lot of any influences that are profound and obvious anyway. But I did see, when I was listening to All Told, there seems to be a almost rock opera level of ambition with that album. I mean, it's a very big album with big concepts, and the songs are complex, and there's just it's pretty remarkable piece of music, and especially when you listen to it start to finish. What was your did you have a goal in mind when you started recording that album in terms of what you wanted to accomplish with All Told?
Well, in the mid-90s, I had a turning point musically where I realized that everything that I was doing musically was either just not completely, but very self-oriented or money-oriented. And I thought that music is something really sacred, and I need to have a better motivation than just self or financial motivation. And so I prayed for guidance, and within 2 weeks I had the template for this big project. It would be called One Vision, and it's a 4-album deal where the 4 albums combined make one picture, and that picture is in this frame. And so the project is a frame with 4 albums in it, and All Told was the first album. So All Told needed to tell the story of all 4 albums in one album, or at least touch on all the different tangents and places that we wanted to go musically and lyrically. So it was a real challenging idea because we wanted All Told to dovetail with 3 other albums that we hadn't written or conceived yet. So we did that, and obviously it took a long time to create, and we were always thinking of it in terms of Beatles, Pink Floyd, Zeppelin, how great they were and how creative and innovative they were. And together we helped evolve this concept of what All Told says. And rather than put too many words on what that concept is, it does tell a story from beginning to end that when the listener experiences that, my God, it's a really deeply moving experience because it very clearly does what it's designed to do. And it kind of tells the story of one person's life, the falling in love, the losing of the parents, the childlike joys of, being young and blind and in love.
And then it sounds like the concept of the album, there was a visual component to it. I mean, you talked about it visually in terms of what you wanted to accomplish. There's these albums that aren't made yet.
Let me inject something here. So, the story is really involved, and to really tell it properly, it would take a long time. We're co-writing a book called Bros, and the story will really come out in that. But Mike and I had worked together in Heart a lot, and then after Heart, we worked together and created some real amazing, totally wacky experimental music. And then we had a time when we weren't working together, and we had a kind of epiphany where we started to work together again, and Mike can tell that story.
We kind of went our separate ways, where Roger was doing his thing and I was doing my thing, and we both raised families.
And what time frame was that?
Well, it kind of
mid-'80s?
Yeah, mid-'80s, I guess. We kind of went apart. But we always wanted to finish the stuff we had been working on. It was just busy, I built a sound reinforcement company, and Raj did Alias and other things. And when our parents passed away, it was like this sort of alarm clock in your life where you realize, gee, I only have so much time left too. I got things to do. I've got my bucket list,
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big items for me was working with Raj again and finishing what we started. And so we went on this trip to Europe. Roger was living in the Czech Republic then, and we kind of went to Norway with my sister, Roger and my sister and I, and then went to the Czech Republic. And on that trip, Raj asked me to join him and finish that project that we'd started. And I wanted to, but I was busy. I was busy investing and doing really well with that and raising my family. And I was considering doing this way. I considered it for about 2 years. And then we have these big family meetings. I have 11 children, and Roger has a whole big bunch of them. And we meet at my sister's house or his house or my house and have just incredible bonding experiences. And so this one day, Roger had just fallen in love with Linda Manning, his girlfriend now. And he was just head over heels in love with her. And he wanted to play us this song that he had just written about her. And so he just, in front of the big group, started playing this on his acoustic guitar. And geez, we were just all so moved. We all had tears in our eyes. Such a moving song. And I just thought, man, that guy is great. He deserves my support. So I said, okay, give me all your music. I want to hear everything you've ever done. So he gave me about 100 songs. And in those days, I was only working till about 2:00 in the afternoon when the market closed. And then I would go for a hike in the mountains or something. So I just took his music up there and would go way up high and park myself on some huge cliff somewhere and listen to the stuff. And Roger hadn't discussed anything about the One Vision project or anything like that. It was just a blank slate. And I listened to all that material, and somehow, out of listening to it all, I felt there's a story here. And in my investing, I was really interested in Apple and Steve Jobs and Pixar. And one of the big things in the success of Pixar was the importance of story to the effectiveness of how well a movie communicates. And a story is everything to them, more important than anything else. And I thought, well, that should be that way in music too. And in fact, these songs have a story to them. And I looked back at the artwork for the One Vision project, and I thought, wow, this would fit really well into that format. And this is not with Raj saying we should do this. I just reached the same conclusion that he had already come to. And I said, so I put together the All Told album in order of the way I thought the story would lay out. And I went to Raj and I said, man, this is so cool. Listen to this. And we drove around in my SUV and I played it for him. And he just thought, he gets it, I guess, because he liked it. And we conceived of this project that is really daunting and big and not like anything I've ever heard of anybody else doing. And that's how it kind of came together.
So how many years start to finish did the concept, the start of the concept to the final cut of the record? What was that time frame?
Yeah, it was 15 years because the concept was in 1995, and then we had our record release party in 2010.
Okay. 2016 or
2016.
Oh, no, 2016. That's right. So it was 21 years.
So I remember we got, the first song we did was Love Alive, and it was on 2011, I think.
So you have 11 children, Mike?
Mm-hmm.
And how many kids do you have, Roger?
5.
And what brought you to the Czech Republic, Roger?
Oh,
woman.
Yeah. I hooked up with this lady and we started going, a Czech lady, and we started going back to visit her family like once a year. And God, I just fell in love with the European way of life, the way of living, the sense of community and the sense of frugality over there. And I just loved it so much. And we kept going back year after year that I thought, man, I just want to live over here. I love this way of being. And it's so different from America. America just disgusted me with all these things that I didn't like. And then there's just such an adherence to making money in America, and people, they don't work to live, they live to work. And it's just the opposite of how life should be to me. And it was the opposite of what the lifestyle was chosen by so many Europeans. So it was an easy decision to do that. Well, after living there for a year, the tensions between me and my wife were such that one morning she suggested that we get a divorce. And I said, well, I think that's a good idea. And so shortly after that, I moved back to America. And I was approached by one of Seattle's nicest nightclubs. They said, we had a cancellation for Saturday night in 2 weeks. Would you like to play that gig? And I said, sure. And they said, do you have a band? Oh, yeah, I've got a band. But I didn't have a band. I just moved back from Europe. And so I threw some people together and had this concept of, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll set up a living room on stage with all my living room furniture. And I had my artist friend paint this fireplace situation with a mirror hanging on it. And the night would be, the performance that the audience saw was a play of us rehearsing for this performance at that nightclub. And so that having that context to work in, anything that went wrong would just be part of the rehearsal. So anything goes.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty good idea.
Gives you some freedom.
Yeah, because we didn't have a whole lot of time to rehearse with these musicians. So the way this show started was they had a great big red curtain in front of the stage, and the curtain goes up, and there's Raj. Oh, right around this same time, Eminem had come out with a version of Crazy on You that was called Crazy in Love. And it was a brilliant adaptation of our song. And it was popular. It was really popular on the radio. And so that song comes on and the curtain goes up and there's Raj in his underwear, just his underpants, dancing in front of that mirror and miming to that song. And it was hilarious. And that's how the show started. And then it became clear that you'd hear a knock on the door and then one of the guest artists would come in for the rehearsal.
Very clever.
Yeah. And so it was great. It was a real fun show. And
we should do it again sometime.
Yeah. We should do it at the Triple Door maybe. And near the end of the show, I had asked all the musicians to bring suits because we're going to perform a song for a Seattle musician that was just really loved, a great guitar player by the name of Joe Shikani. 2 weeks before, 11 days before, I think, he had been tragically killed in a windstorm where a tree came down and fell on him and killed him. And so it was time to play that song right near the end of the night. And I can't find my shirt. I'm running around backstage looking for the shirt and to my suit. And this friend said, "Roger, I'd like you to meet somebody. This is Linda Manning." And when I heard that name, my heart just sank because she was Joe Shikani's girlfriend of 4 years. So I went over there and hugged her. And we hugged for a long time. And we looked deeply into each other's eyes. And something happened there. So we finished the show. And a month and a half later, I found Linda's email address and wrote to her saying that I hadn't been able to forget about that hug. Could we go out to dinner? So we went out to dinner, and then we've been together ever since, and that's 10 years ago now.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so that was a real life changer for me.
So I'd like to go back to the mid to late 70s in that time frame and ask you about some of these iconic songs that still to this day you hear on the radio and you hear in movies. Barracuda, Magic Man, Straight On. I mean, just there's so many songs that came out of those 4 albums, those 4 studio albums that are timeless. And what I'd like to know from both of you, Mike and Roger, is whether at the time that you were creating this music, you knew. Is it one of those moments where you just know this is a hit, and not only is this a hit, but this is going to be legendary?
You have to back up even more than that to get to the knowing part for me, because prior to calling Roger and Steve and telling them to move up with Ann and I had this 3-day experience where I was so excited about the idea for this band that I couldn't sleep. And I was going to school, at the university up there, but all I could do was stay up all night designing equipment and working on a business plan and this and that sort of thing. And then when they did move up, that forced the issue of, well, am I going to do this or am I going to finish my education? It was like this huge thing for me to have to decide. And so it came to the point where one day I had to go one way or the other. And I went down and I stood next to the stream, same stream that's in Crazy on You. And I stood by that stream and this thing washed over me where I could see the future. I could see what was going to happen one way or the other. And what I saw in the path of our band was that it would be incredible. It would be so successful and so much fun. And I knew that it would work, and I knew how it would end. And I decided, well, it's worth doing. And that, for me, that knowing persisted and carried me through a lot of dark, doubtful days. Right. Yeah.
So it sounds like you knew some great things were going to happen, but it wasn't going to last
I knew
forever.
I knew it. Yeah.
So the songs, Roger, that I just mentioned, these iconic songs, when you were involved in the writing process and recording process of those songs, well, for all of the songs, but especially these iconic songs that have been timeless, did you know at the time that they were pretty special, or was it something that you later accepted and that you maybe didn't know at the time that they were going to be hits?
When I first started working with Ann and Nance and heard their not only musical skills, but their adeptness at songwriting, I was really impressed, really intimidated. And I thought, man, how am I ever going to be a good songwriter? And when it was time to start writing songs for Dreamboat Annie, I didn't really feel like I had any skill at it. You know, I'd written little things that were nice little things, but I hadn't really written something that lyrically had what to me seemed merit or importance. So we lived on the edge of Lighthouse Park at that time in West Vancouver. And I loved to go out by myself and just wander through the woods in the park. It's virgin forest, some huge rocks in here. They're continental, part of the continental drift, some of the oldest rocks on the North American continent. And I went up on top of one of these big rocks one day and prayed for the ability to be a great songwriter. And then within a day or two, wrote the lick for Sing Child. And that was the beginning of the marriage of hard rock with the lyrical folk-based input from the Wilson sisters. And that marriage proved to be a real great union of directions. And when I heard the lyrics to Crazy on You, I just thought, man, those are brilliant. Those are profound. It's really great. And I remember we were, Mike and Ann and Nancy and I were living together in this A-frame house in Point Roberts, Washington, which was a tip of land, a point of land that hung across the 49th parallel. So you cross the border into Canada to get off Point Roberts. It's you can't access it through the United States, only by boat. So it was a neat place to live just south of Vancouver. And one day we're sitting there in our A-frame cabin and they're working on this song, and they've got this galloping guitar part that was influenced by the Moody Blues. And they said, Raj, we want a counter melody kind of line here, a signature line to go against this part. What would you play? And so I just, my favorite way of coming up with stuff is to not do anything and just listen. And I'll hear something in my head. And what I heard in my head that day was da 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 da. And so that was that. And so much of our co-writing together came of being inspired by hearing a great song and then coming up with a part that had to be on that level. So, we inspired each other to do great work. And, those great songs that they wrote were just fine, but they were elevated by my input. And it was a nice union of elements.
Was there a clear process of credits for songwriting that was happening within the band at that time?
Not at all.
Okay.
And a case in point was Crazy on You, when we were discussing the credits to the songs, who should get what for what participation in songwriting. My name hadn't been mentioned at all in the creation of Crazy on You, and Howard Leese spoke up saying that, that guitar lick is a signature piece of music that stands on its own and is a vital, critical part of the song that you should receive royalties for that. And had he not said that, I never would have gotten any credit or royalties for that lick.
But it sounds like there was discussion about it at some point, but you weren't really jockeying for writing credits, but other people were giving you suggestions on.
Well, Howard said that you deserve songwriting credit for that.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious because I've never been in a band that actually had to worry about songwriting credits because we never made any money in my band. But whether it was competitive, whether it was a competitive environment or there were hard feelings about people getting song credits for songs that you think that you contributed to, that you should have gotten credit for, was there that type of conflict going on within the band that you recall in the 70s?
Well, not really. I always thought I should have gotten more credit for how much musical input I gave to those songs, just because I was this font of energy and ideas. And I never felt that I was justly rewarded for that. But I'm pretty easygoing and I'm willing to just let stuff slide so I don't have to deal with it.
Right.
Yeah.
I felt that there was a lot of jockeying going on because I had to kind of manage it. And the hardest thing for a band to do to become successful is to not break up. And so it seemed like part of the art of that is trying to keep everybody happy somehow. And so I had to be the advocate for different people in different situations when they didn't feel it was fair, So yeah, there was a certain amount of that.
Yeah. Well, it seems like anytime you add money into an equation, into a relationship, there's going to be issues.
And it wasn't even money. It was just the idea of money,
Yeah.
because we were still poor.
Right.
I mean, compared to what became later.
So these relationships that you had with Mike with Ann and Roger with Nancy, did they both end around the same time, or yeah?
Well, no, actually, Roger and Nancy broke up first.
And when that happened, how difficult was it to continue as a band, given that they were no longer together? And I'm asking this of you, Mike, and I'll ask you, Roger, and you might have a different memory of it, but
it was heartbreaking to me because the bond of the four of us was really powerful. And when that bond was broken, we lost something.
And Roger, when the relationship ended with Nancy, did you get a sense that it was going to be difficult to continue as a band after that point?
When I knew the band was over was when we were recording Little Queen down in Seattle. And one day I had an idea for a little musical addition to Love Alive that was really a great idea, and presented it to Ann, and she said, "No, we're not going to do that." And the way she responded made it clear to me that she was acting out of a position of power that she had now realized she was in, and that she was kind of steering the ship to a large degree, and she didn't need to have this. She didn't need to incorporate this idea that this guitarist had, this mere guitarist had. So no, we're not going to do that. And I knew that she made that choice, that decision. It wasn't a musical decision. It was a demonstrating her position of power. And as soon as that was uttered, I knew it was over. And I went for this big, long walk and cried and cried and cried, and came back to the studio. And in my heart, it wasn't a band anymore. but it was much after that we officially broke up. But yeah, when I split up with Nance, it was just absolutely devastating to me on the deepest level. And I went into a depression that lasted for a long time, and I was really unpleasant to be around because I was just totally bummed out. And it was really, really awful, really awkward and awful to be in the band and be going around and playing live. And meanwhile, Nancy's she's hanging out now with DeRozier, the drummer. And it was so painful for me. It was just awful.
Yeah. And the relationship with Ann ended pretty quickly after you left the band, Roger. What was your journey in music until the All Told album?
Okay, so when I was in the band, it actually started before we even had the final permutation of Heart put together. When we were writing and recording, when we were poor, we had a little bit of money, and so we could afford some recording gear. Anne made it clear that my singing wasn't on the level where I could sing with them. No, you can't sing with us. You can't sing in tune. It wasn't approached as, here, let me help you become a better singer. It was just, you can't sing with us. And it was psychological abuse that went on and got deeper and worse until we finally did split. But it really hit me on a deep level where I didn't have any confidence that I could sing. So when I left the band, I made up my mind that I was going to become not just a good singer, but a great singer. So I started taking vocal lessons 2 hours a day, 5 days a week from Seattle's most popular vocal teacher, and started writing songs just a lot, and built a studio in my home where I was going to create an album and have this great comeback. And boy, it sure didn't happen, that comeback. But I had a new resolve to become a really good musician, and that was real healthy and that was real good. So in this studio, we just started recording like crazy, and we were working with DeRozier at that time, and Joe Shikani was in the group, and we came up with some real brilliant stuff, some great songs and really nice high quality recordings. And then, like we were talking about, Mike and I went our separate ways, and I just kept writing and recording, and that's how I amassed over 100 songs to give him later. But yeah, so okay, I lost direction.
Yeah. So, and then that I think you already talked about after that family reunion or that meeting at the house where you played the song for your whole family, the love song that you wrote, that kind of transitioned into Mike getting involved and helping with this concept album.
Right.
Yeah. All Told. Okay. I'd like to, because we have this common connection of my dad, Greg Smith. I'd like to ask you about what you remember about Greg. And because the listeners don't know yet who my dad is, he flew the band Heart, I think starting in the mid 70s or mid to late 70s and all the way through the late 80s was their private pilot. And I had the good fortune to meet the band Heart backstage at the Paramount, and I wish I remembered the year, but I was little. It was with my sister. It may have been when you were still in the band, Roger, and Mike, you were still in the band, but I don't remember. And then there was another opportunity for me to meet them in the mid 80s, where I know you weren't around at that time, Roger, but my dad passed away in 2003 of a heart attack, and I didn't really get a chance to know him very well. He was gone a lot, flying. He flew Neil Young and John Cougar and Def Leppard and Men at Work and Joni Mitchell and all kinds of. Amazing. Yeah, he really lived quite a life, and he's an amazing guy in many ways. But he wasn't around for me to really hear some of these stories. So, what do you remember of my dad, Greg Smith? And either of you can go first. Yeah.
Well, we all loved your dad. He was a great guy. So in the world we were in, there's a lot of pretty rough and tough, kind of not very polished characters. And so your dad was a very pleasant contrast to that. He was a military guy. So he had a lot of self-discipline, excellent manners. He was very sharp and on the ball. He was very responsible, and he had our lives in his hands. And he saved our life more than once. He was just always great to be around, always in a very balanced, logical, stable kind of place, which is what you want in a pilot.
Right.
And I could tell you some of these stories of things that happened that were pretty cool, where your dad kind of saved our bacon, you could say.
I'd like to hear them if you have any.
Okay, so he had, when we first started working with him, he had a Super King Air, which is a really nice airplane.
I remember that plane.
Yeah. And it was just big enough for the band and a couple of staff people and our luggage. And but it was a nice airplane, had a long glide ratio, and we really liked that plane. But one day, we were just leaving for a tour, and something required mechanical work on the plane, and we had to get something at the last minute. And Greg found a plane. We were just lucky to find anything, but he found this plane from Alaska that was being retired. It had been doing a lot of bush flights up there, and it was bigger than what we were used to. But it seemed pretty tired when we saw it. And so we were taking off from SeaTac, which has a really long runway, and flying to Chicago. And we're going down the runway, and I'm thinking, why aren't we in the area? We're getting close to the end of the runway, and the plane finally lifts off, and it feels like we're just clearing the trees at the other end. And we're heading east, and we come to the mountain range east of the Seattle Cascades, and I'm looking at the mountains coming, and I'm thinking, are we going to get over those things? We just clear the mountains. We had a really heavy load of baggage and people and fuel, and so Greg used to like to let us come up and hang out in the cabin in the pilot's area, and I like to go up there because I was really fascinated with flight, and I was thinking about becoming a pilot myself. And so I was looking at all the gauges, and there were gauges that showed the left fuel tank fuel level and the left both fuel tanks fuel level, left and right, and the rate of consumption. So I was watching these gauges while your dad's flying the plane, and this plane came with a co-pilot from the plane. Whoever owned it supplied a pilot too. So I'm watching the gauges, and I notice that one fuel tank had quite a bit more fuel than the other. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Why aren't they balanced? And then I'm looking at the rate of consumption. Well, the tank that was fuller had a higher rate of consumption than the one that was emptier, which I thought that doesn't make sense. So I told your dad, Well, I didn't say anything at first. I kept watching it, thinking that I must not understand something about this. And after a while, I started to be kind of nervous about it because I thought, how do you know how much fuel you have when these things are telling two different stories? So I told your dad, and he looked at the gauges, and he didn't say anything for a minute. And then he said, "You're right. It doesn't make sense." And so then he... and we were getting close to Chicago. I guess we were, I said, how do we know how much fuel we have? He says, we don't know. So we had to do a emergency landing in Wisconsin somewhere. And we couldn't, the plane had, when they started looking at it, there were all kinds of things about it that weren't airworthy. And so we had to get a different plane. So that was one interesting thing, but that was nothing compared to what was going to happen later on that tour, where the cowboy pilot that came with the plane, and he was like a real piece of work, that guy. It's really different than your dad. Like when we were in Chicago, he wanted, I think we all went to the Playboy Club or something. Well, he was the other pilot was having way too much fun, didn't want to come home with us. So the next day, when we were leaving to go somewhere, nobody could find him. We had to leave without him. But so later on in the tour, we were in San Francisco heading to Las Vegas. And we had another airplane that was just like the first one, but it was newer. It was pretty new. And so we were flying along, going over the Sierras, I guess. And all of a sudden, there was this bang. This felt like we hit a brick wall, and the plane went straight down at full speed.
The plane is going down.
It's at full speed, going down at full speed. And that was such an intense experience. I really thought we were going to die.
We all did. We were all just
we were
terrified.
Just pinned to our seats. I don't know what G-forces it was, but it was intense. So what happened was that the co-pilot was asleep with his feet up on the dashboard somehow, and his feet had slid off and somehow put down the landing gear and caused us to go into that dive. And so what your dad did was, with all those incredible G-forces, he had to climb under the co-pilot's seat, I think it was, and hand crank the landing gear back up while we're in the dive. I don't know how he could even do that or have the presence of mind to do that, but that's what he did. And we leveled off just barely above the land.
Yeah.
And when we got to Las Vegas, they had to have these spotter planes come out and look at us, and they brought out all the fire trucks and everything. And, we didn't know if we were going to be able to land or not, but we did. But that was really, really incredible of him.
Yeah. And so did the co-pilot get fired at that point?
Yeah, he did. That was it for him.
And all of these planes required a co-pilot at that time, right? I mean, these were big enough planes where you needed it.
Yeah, I don't think we even continued with that plane after that. But then there was another time where we were taking off from Raleigh, and it was kind of known for turbulence around there. And we had the Gulfstream at that point, which was a much bigger plane that was all decked out for us, really super luxurious. And Ann and I were sitting, we had like a couch in there, and we were sitting together, and we hit this turbulence that was so incredible. The wings were flapping up and down like a bird. I don't even know how metal can bend that much. That was just astonishing. And she grabbed my leg with her, and her fingernails punched right through my denim jeans. Just, that's how strong she grabbed my leg. It was, but we didn't die. We survived that somehow.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, another thing about your dad was he was always really positive, upbeat, in a good mood. He was a beacon of light when he would come around. He's just happy.
Yeah.
It was just,
And he liked our band too.
yeah, that helped.
Oh, yeah. He was a huge fan.
We had some really fun times with him. I remember one time we were in St. Louis and we were playing at the arena there back to back, where I think Queen played the first night and we played the second night, or vice versa. And your dad was like, we were like big Queen fans and friends, personal friends with those guys, and loved their music and really felt like, they were really special. I asked your dad if he liked the band, and he said, well, they're okay, but they're not as good as you guys.
Oh, that's cool. That's so cool. Well, it means a lot to me to hear from you about my dad, because I unfortunately have to learn about his life through his friends. And
see, you can just look at you and you've got kind of a smile in your eyebrows, a smile in your eyes. It's the same thing that your dad. I mean, you look like a happy person. You're attractive because of your positiveness that you have.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I looked up to my dad as someone who was kind of larger than life and someone who just had a lot of natural charisma. And I've never considered myself to be someone who had charisma, that was attractive, not physically attractive, but just this thing that people have, in a room. When you walk into a room, he had it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I want to be around that guy.
Mm-hmm.
He knows what's going on. He had that kind of charisma. But that's pretty cool. Thanks for sharing that.
So, I was talking about me taking my own path with guitar influences and trying to take the road less chosen kind of idea. But I was most moved by the triumvirate of Clapton, Page, Beck. Each one of those guys were really innovative in their own ways with the influence that they took from the blues and everywhere else that they took influences from. It's, to me, they just had such a innovative, inventive take on music. And that's what I loved most about their direction, their guitar playing direction. And it really revealed a dedication on their part to become as good as they were.
Yeah. Well, I would be remiss if I did not ask you about your concert last night, because I was there with Jason, my producer, and it was pretty remarkable to see you bring up on stage with you the School of Rock kids. Right out of the gate, you bring these kids up on stage and really blew the audience away with musicianship from young people and encouragement from you. Can you tell us more about how you got involved with School of Rock and how that resulted in those kids being up on stage with you last night in Edmonds?
Mike and I have done other shows with kids before, and it's just such a joy to see these kids approach something that's really scary, going out on stage and performing for people. But they have what we had when we were younger. We had a dream, and these kids have their dream. They want to do this thing with their life, and we give them a chance to do it, and it's just so much fun. You get together. We had a rehearsal, and you point out all these things that they need to be aware of, and that needs to change, that needs to get better. And then you let them go for a few days, and then we do the show, and you observe that, wow, they really did their homework, and they did what they were supposed to do. And I'm standing on the stage next to these 12 to 18-year-old kids, just seeing them so happy and beaming. They're nervous, but part of the lesson that I gave them was that you take adrenaline and you make it work for you instead of against you, and then it is empowering. And it's just such a joy having them up there. I'm going to be doing a lot more work with the School of Rock because, when you get older, you realize that you need to pass stuff on. If you've got something of real value in you, what good is it if you never pass it on to younger people? It's kind of selfish, and it's a shame. So, so to do a little bit of teaching is really nice and really appropriate.
Yeah, and I was so impressed with the energy that you brought to the show, start to finish, and it was just so clear to see that you not only were a rock star and a rock legend, you still are to this day. I mean, bringing it.
It's funny because, there are other people out there who do parodies of rock stars, and it's almost embarrassing in a way to go out there and act like this rock star, but it's not an act. It's genuine motivation stemming from a deep feeling of music. And so when we're playing these great songs like Mistral Wind, I can't help but assume my rock god self and enter this other dimension of the song is so great. To perform it with justice, you have to assume this position of
the song plays you.
Yeah, the song plays us. And so in my not wanting to be like other performers, I cast away any limits or any encumbrances to my freedom of how I can move on stage. So I've got all these wild, wacky moves that I do, and have kind of perfected a style of doing that nobody else does. And when I got home last night, I kind of looked back in my mind's eye at who I was on stage there last night, and how set apart from other performers I am. And it's really nice to see that I've created this persona that stands alone for better or worse. Yeah. And it's not that I'm proud of that, but I'm pleased that I was able to choose a direction that is my own and is singular and unique. And it's so much fun going out and being that character.
I have two more questions. Very briefly, we are here in a barn.
It was built in 1906. Yeah, built in 1906.
Historic barn in King County, correct?
Yeah.
And it's remarkable. I mean, we're in the loft of the barn now, and you've got these high vaulted ceilings. You've got timber frames around, and just so the audience knows where the creaking is coming from, we have this wood creaky floor, and so when we're moving around our chairs, we're hearing some of the creaking of the wood floors. But there's a stage downstairs below the loft, and this whole building just seems very special and unique. Can you tell us briefly about the story of this
It's
studio?
another magical place.
It is.
This is a place that Mike found, and the way he found it is a illustration of why he's the magic man. Take it, Mike.
So we have this friend who is in the TV business, and he was telling us as we're having a conference call. I'm driving along, talking with Raj and this guy, and he's saying, you guys should have your own TV show. And he said, I can help you do that. You could do something like Daryl's House.
I've seen that.
Only different, And And I said, yeah, somebody said, maybe we could have a barn or something. And I'm driving along and I think, yeah, that'd be cool. Something different. And I know of a barn, and I think I was driving back from Roger's house or something, and I was going to be going past it. So I thought, I'm just going to go stop at that barn and see what it's like. And never been here before. And I got here and looked around to see if I could find somebody to talk to about it, knock on the door downstairs. And this guy who kind of reminded me of Santa Claus shows up. And I said, would you be interested in renting this barn? And he said, come in here. I want to talk to you. And he's got the shocking white hair and he's in his mid-70s. And he said, this is really bizarre that you're asking me this question because I just got back from my attorney's office where we were discussing the fact that I'm thinking about renting this barn. And you're the first guy I've seen since I met this meeting. So he says, come on up, I'll show you the space. So we walk up the stairs and it's been converted into kind of an event space with 35-foot high ceilings. And they had a little tiny stage in here then. And at that time, all the walls had big holes in them so you could see daylight through the walls and everything. And they had built this upper apartment with a kitchen and sauna and 2 bedrooms, and it's just beautiful.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And you've got the stage for performing.
We kind of redid the room so we could record in here. And
yeah, I mean, talk about man cave.
Yeah, it's awesome
on steroids. This is just really incredible. My last question is, what is next for Mike and Roger Fisher? And where can people find you on social media or in new projects that you're working on?
Yeah, rogerfisher.com is kind of our home on the web. And we are continuing to flesh out the One Vision project. We've just finished recording and are about to release our Heart of the Blues album, which is a whole really cool story in itself.
A great album. I mean, all told, is a great album. At some point, I'm going to make a video that is something like, this is what it used to be like. People would get together and they would sit down and they would have drinks and maybe have a puff of cannabis or something and listen to an album. And this is what I suggest that you try, young people or whoever, and try it with this All Told album. Get some people together, sit down and listen to this from beginning to end, and you will be blown away. Anyway, so the latest album, Heart of the Blues, is like that too. It isn't really meant to be a concept album per se, but the way the songs all dovetail and illustrate recurring motifs of some very valuable information is profound. It's just such a great, moving album. Really hope some people check that out. And then we've also got our own kind of tea. It has 31 herbs, organic herbs from around the world. It's super good for you. And
I've been sipping on this through the whole interview.
Yeah,
good stuff.
It's becoming pretty popular. And then we've also just come out with a new product called Heart of the Blues whiskey. It's 100 proof, 100% rye, really smooth, great whiskey. So these are things to be looking for in your community, folks.
I can personally attest that whiskey is very smooth. I had it last night at the concert, and excellent. Nice work. Thank you both for your time and for the stories. It was really fun.
Yeah. And we'd like a transcript of it too, and permission to use it in our book, Bros.
Absolutely. It's yours.
Great.
Hey, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the DreamPath podcast. If so, I have a favor to ask. Can you go to your favorite podcast service and give me a rating and review? Your feedback is what keeps this podcast going. I appreciate your time, and as always, go find your dream path.